My daughter-in-law, Brielle Whitaker, changed the locks 3 days after we buried my son. She told me I was no longer family. I stood on the porch with 2 suitcases and my late husband's ashes in my purse. But 2 weeks later, at the will reading, the same woman who threw me out learned that my son, Corbin Hale, had planned for betrayal. And I was the one holding the final word. Kirsten Vale had worked for every square inch of her independence. At 27, she had just signed the lease on a sleek downtown Portland apartment overlooking the river, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished concrete floors, the kind of place her parents once called unnecessary. Law school hadn't been funded by family pride or support. It had been paid for with scholarships, sleepless nights, and a brutal schedule at a mid-sized litigation firm that barely knew how young she really was. Her parents, Hollis and Mary Beth Vale, hadn't visited much while she struggled. But the moment she settled into something beautiful, something stable, they suddenly reappeared, smiling too widely, asking too many questions about security codes, spare keys, and her work schedule. The first sign was subtle. Kirsten returned home one evening and noticed her entryway rug slightly misaligned. She assumed she'd kicked it earlier. The next day, her bathroom cabinet mirror was left cracked open an inch. She never left it like that. Then her leather-bound planner, the one she kept precisely aligned on her desk, was angled differently. She told herself she was being paranoid. Stress could do that. Until the scent hit her. Gardenia. Her mother's signature lotion, thick floral, impossible to miss. It clung faintly to the hallway air. Not enough for a guest. Just enough to linger. Kirsten stood still in the center of her living room, pulse rising. The apartment was locked. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. But someone had been there. And deep down she didn't need proof to know who. Instead of calling her parents in a panic, instead of accusing them outright, Kirsten did something quieter. She began to watch her own life more carefully. Because if they were stepping inside her space without permission, she needed to know why. She didn't call her mother and casually ask if she had stopped by. She didn't accuse her father of crossing a line. Instead, she tested a theory. 2 years ago, when she first moved into her old place, she had hidden a spare key inside a ceramic planter on her balcony, a habit from college days. When she upgraded to this apartment, she brought the planter with her. She never told her parents about the key directly, but she had once mentioned it carelessly during a family dinner. That night, she stepped onto her balcony and lifted the planter. The key was gone. Not misplaced. Not shifted. Gone. Her stomach didn't drop. It hardened. The next morning, Kirsten left for work as usual, heels clicking confidently down the hallway, but instead of heading straight to the office, she drove to an electronics store. Within hours, discrete interior cameras were installed. One facing the entryway, one covering the living room, and one angled subtly toward her home office. No blinking lights. No obvious indicators. Just quiet recording. For 3 days, nothing happened. She almost felt foolish. Then on the 4th afternoon, while sitting in her office downtown reviewing case files, her phone buzzed with a motion alert. Kirsten opened the live feed. The front door unlocked smoothly. Her father, Hollis Vale, stepped inside first, relaxed, familiar, comfortable. No hesitation. Her mother followed behind him, closing the door gently like she belonged there. They didn't look nervous. They didn't look guilty. They looked entitled. Kirsten watched in absolute silence as her parents walked deeper into her apartment, glancing around like inspectors surveying property. And in that moment, suspicion turned into certainty. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. At first, Kirsten tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were checking on her. Maybe it was misguided parental concern. Maybe they just missed her. But the second camera feed erased every excuse. From her office downtown, she watched her father move with unsettling confidence toward her hallway closet, the one place she kept locked. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a small ring of tools from his jacket pocket. Tools. Kirsten's jaw tightened as Hollis knelt and picked the lock with casual precision. This wasn't spontaneous. This was practiced. Inside the closet sat a locked metal file cabinet containing printed drafts, client intake summaries, and research notes tied to active litigation. Nothing public. Nothing meant for family eyes. Hollis opened it. Mary Beth stood behind him, whispering urgently, glancing toward the door as if someone might walk in. Kirsten turned up the audio. Just take photos, her mother murmured. We don't need originals. We just need leverage. Leverage. Her father methodically flipped through documents, using his phone to photograph pages, pausing on anything with numbers, property maps, settlement estimates. This wasn't curiosity. It was extraction. Then came the sentence that made her stomach go cold. We can finally fix the mistake she made, Mary Beth said quietly. She owes us that much. Owes us. Kirsten felt something inside her fracture. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. Years of emotional distance suddenly made sense. The sudden interest in her job. The probing questions about high-value cases. The unexpected visits. They hadn't come to reconnect. They had come to use her. And they believed she would never notice. Kirsten didn't cry. She simply watched, memorizing every movement, every whisper. Because now this wasn't about suspicion. This was about betrayal. Kirsten couldn't confront them yet, not without understanding why. Late that night, she began quietly tracing her family's finances. Hollis and Mary Beth had always lived comfortably enough, but a few irregularities in public records caught her attention. Unpaid taxes, sudden loans, and transfers to a company she barely recognized, Hale Properties. Her investigation led her to her cousin Braxton Hale, a man always described as ambitious but reckless. A failing real estate venture lined up perfectly with her parents' sudden interest in her apartment. Her heart sank as she connected the dots. They weren't interested in her apartment because they cared. They were drowning financially and saw her rising legal career as the solution. Kirsten felt a chill as she realized the full scope of their plan. Her confidential documents, her client contacts, even her apartment itself could become collateral. Her parents had calculated every angle. They had believed that by inserting themselves quietly into her life, they could siphon information, possibly even manipulate her career decisions, all while keeping their hands clean in her eyes. She remembered the subtle behaviors that once seemed harmless. Questions about her work hours, casual comments about her savings, even Mary Beth's offhand remark about good investments. It wasn't curiosity, it was a blueprint. That night, Kirsten sat on the edge of her unmade bed, staring at the city lights through her floor-to-ceiling windows. Anger, betrayal, and disbelief churned inside her. She had spent years building her independence, yet the people who were supposed to support her were scheming to exploit it. But with clarity came resolve. She didn't need to confront them immediately. She didn't need to fight yet. She could watch. She could plan. She could let the weight of their greed and betrayal set the stage for the reckoning they didn't see coming. Her parents had a motive. Now Kirsten would find the method. Kirsten knew confronting her parents now would be futile. Anger wouldn't stop them, and legal action at this stage might alert them too soon. She needed patience, precision, and invisibility. She began by quietly relocating her assets. Savings accounts were transferred under discreet, legally protected names. Investments were rerouted, and sensitive client files were duplicated and stored securely off-site. Every move was silent, every step invisible. If her parents were counting on her naivety, they were about to be proven wrong. Next, she planned her physical disappearance. She spoke to her extended relatives, telling them she had been assigned a high-stakes, long-term project in another city. A trial that would keep her away for months. She avoided emotional explanations. No apologies. No confessions. Just the facts. Kirsten Vale, rising attorney, needed focus. Then came the final step. Her apartment, carefully staged and intact, would remain as bait. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing seemed out of place. The cameras were still active, recording every inch of intrusion, every stolen glance at her possessions. She wanted them to believe the opportunity was still there. On the day she left, she walked out with nothing more than a small suitcase and her professional laptop. She didn't glance back. She didn't send a message. She vanished into the city streets like a shadow, leaving her parents' plans dangling in the wind. That night, she watched through her remote feeds as they returned to the apartment. Hollis and Mary Beth moved with their usual confidence, oblivious to the trap she had set. the documents they hoped to exploit, the apartment they thought they still controlled. All part of her carefully orchestrated plan. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, Kirsten felt a cold satisfaction. She wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. She wasn't powerless. She was in control. And every move from now on would be hers to command. Kirsten knew that knowledge alone wasn't enough. She needed to manipulate her parents, to make them act, to set their own downfall in motion. Inside her empty apartment, she carefully planted fabricated documents. On her office desk, she left drafts of legal settlements that didn't exist, multimillion-dollar deals tied to a high-profile property acquisition, spreadsheets with convincing numbers, emails with legitimate-looking letterheads, and mock confidential memos littered the drawer. Every detail was meticulously crafted to appear authentic. She thought about her parents as she worked. Hollis, always hungry for an edge, and Marybeth, eager to guide him. They wouldn't resist. Greed had always been a weakness for them. Kirsten smiled faintly at the thought of them walking straight into her trap. The bait was irresistible. Money, influence, and the illusion that her success could serve their failing ventures. She also included hints that these deals would require inside knowledge, nudging them to invade further, to cross more boundaries. Every photograph, every copy they took would confirm the illusion. From a remote location, she monitored her cameras. She didn't intervene. She just waited. It took only 2 days. Hollis returned first, moving through the apartment with the confidence of a man who believed he was entitled. Marybeth followed, eyes scanning for anything that might help them gain an advantage. Kirsten watched silently, her pulse steady, her heart cold. Every action they took only confirmed what she already knew. They couldn't resist. They were predictably, irreversibly drawn to the trap she had designed. Kirsten leaned back, letting satisfaction wash over her. Revenge didn't have to be loud. Sometimes the sweetest vengeance was quiet, calculated, and unseen. Letting the guilty walk straight into the consequences of their own choices. She would let them fall by their own greed. And when it happened, there would be no escape. Kirsten didn't need to wait long. As predicted, her parents took the bait. Hollis returned first, entering the apartment with the casual confidence of a man who believed he owned every corner. Marybeth followed closely behind, whispering instructions and scanning her surroundings like a conspirator in a heist. Kirsten watched remotely, noting every movement, every expression. Her father opened the carefully planted files, flipping through the fabricated settlement drafts with greedy anticipation. He photographed spreadsheets and took notes, his eyes alight with the illusion of imminent gain. Marybeth, equally entranced, whispered advice. "Double-check the numbers. This could save us." It was almost cinematic, watching them cross boundaries that had once been invisible. Kirsten felt no shock anymore, only cold calculation. They weren't simply snooping now. They were actively acting on inside information, even though everything they were seeing was carefully constructed fiction. Days later, she began to see the consequences. Braxton Hale, her cousin and reluctant accomplice in the family's financial chaos, made a high-stakes property purchase based on the documents her parents had copied. They believed they were leveraging Kirsten's knowledge for their own benefit. The purchase was reckless, overpriced, and legally precarious. They had unknowingly walked straight into a trap Kirsten had meticulously designed. Every false figure, every misleading email, every fabricated memo was leading them toward financial collapse. Kirsten allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She didn't interfere. She let greed and betrayal play their course. Her parents, once the ones orchestrating moves behind closed doors, had now crossed the line into a dangerous gamble, one she had rigged entirely. From afar, she felt power and satisfaction. Finally, they were on her terms, dancing unknowingly to her carefully composed symphony of revenge. The consequences unfolded exactly as Kirsten had anticipated. Braxton Hale's property purchase, based on the fabricated documents her parents had stolen, began to unravel almost immediately. Contractors pulled out due to unclear ownership records. Banks froze transactions after noticing inconsistencies. Investors demanded immediate audits. The entire deal spiraled into public failure, and the ripple effects reached her parents like a tidal wave. Hollis and Marybeth, once confident in their manipulations, were blindsided. They had believed they were orchestrating a rescue for themselves, leveraging Kirsten's success as a lifeline. Instead, they had handed their cousin and themselves a financial disaster. Panic replaced greed in their eyes as they realized how far they had crossed, and how much of it was their own doing. Kirsten watched silently from her remote location, noting every call, every desperate whisper, every frantic step her parents took. They tried to fix the damage, scrambling to salvage Braxton's investments, but each move only worsened the collapse. Her parents' financial desperation deepened, each day a reminder of how they had underestimated her resolve. Even from a distance, Kirsten felt a profound sense of justice. She had never wished for harm, but she had ensured that betrayal carried its natural consequences. Every reckless decision, every greedy choice, every violation of trust had now caught up with them. And she remained untouched, calm, composed, and invisible. The apartment she had left intact now served as a memory, a ghost of their failed attempts to control her life. Her parents had thought power came from intrusion and manipulation. Kirsten had demonstrated that real power came from patience, planning, and the courage to let consequences unfold naturally. In that collapse, she saw clarity. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It only needed precision. And in this moment, precision had delivered justice perfectly. By now Hollis and Mary Beth were panicked. Their initial confidence had crumbled under the weight of their own decisions. The property disaster wasn't just Braxton's problem, it had become theirs. Every creditor call, every collection notice, and every public report reminded them that they had overstepped in ways they could not reverse. One evening, driven by desperation, they returned to Kirsten's apartment. They needed answers. They needed to salvage something. They hoped to find clues, maybe documents they had missed, or evidence that could help them recover from the mounting chaos. But the apartment wasn't as they had left it. The doors were locked, the lease terminated, furniture gone, drawers empty. Every item they once believed they could exploit was now gone. Panic set in as they tried to open windows, check balconies, and search every corner. The place, once a symbol of their perceived control, had become a void, a silent indictment of their greed. Hollis's hands shook as he realized the extent of their failure. Mary Beth's face turned pale, eyes darting in disbelief. They had underestimated Kirsten's foresight, her patience, and her ability to turn their betrayal against them. For Kirsten, watching this unfold was bittersweet. She didn't savor their fear. She simply allowed it to be. The sight of her parents, frantic and helpless, was confirmation that her plan had worked perfectly. Every action they had taken, every trespass, every attempt at manipulation, had led them straight to this moment. It was more than revenge. It was the consequence of their own choices, magnified by their greed. And Kirsten, calm and unseen, felt the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing justice had been served without a single word being spoken. Her parents finally understood. She was no longer theirs to control. The room was heavy with tension, but Kirsten remained unshaken. Every calculated move she had made now bore fruit, and her parents could feel the shift in power pressing down on them. She leaned forward, her gaze steady. You believed you could control my life, my career, even my independence. You thought I would never notice. You thought you could sneak, manipulate, and exploit me, and get away with it. Hollis swallowed hard. Mary Beth's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. They had underestimated her intelligence, her patience, and above all, her capacity for strategy. The truth was undeniable. Kirsten had outmaneuvered them at every turn. She detailed the steps she had taken quietly, away from their view. The transferred funds, the relocation, the planted documents, and the careful monitoring of their every move. Every action had been intentional. Every detail a precise part of the plan to let their own greed and betrayal lead them to ruin. You tried to use me as an exit plan, she said softly, letting the weight of her words sink in. But now the game has changed. You have no control, and everything you relied on to save yourselves is failing. Her parents looked at each other, a mixture of guilt and disbelief in their eyes. For the first time, they truly realized they were powerless. They had been the architects of their own downfall, and Kirsten, once vulnerable, had become untouchable. She didn't gloat. She didn't scream. She simply outlined the consequences of their actions with clarity and calm precision. They would survive barely, but the lesson was clear. Betrayal has a price. Kirsten rose, signaling the meeting's end. She had regained her life, her independence, and her dignity. The power had shifted entirely, and her parents now understood that the woman they once tried to manipulate was no longer theirs to control. Months later, the consequences of their choices had fully played out. Hollis and Mary Beth Vale were left to pick up the pieces of their financial ruin. Braxton Hale declared bankruptcy, the fallout from the reckless property purchase hitting him and indirectly them. Creditors closed in, lawsuits mounted, and their names carried the shadow of failed schemes. The life they had tried to control with manipulation and deceit now crumbled under the weight of their own greed. Kirsten, meanwhile, thrived. She had secured her new apartment, advanced in her firm, and built a network of trust and respect around her. Every career milestone, every promotion, every successful case was a quiet reminder of her resilience and foresight. She didn't need revenge and anger. The natural consequences had delivered the justice she sought. The lesson was clear. Betrayal carries its own weight, and karma has a meticulous way of balancing the scales. Kirsten didn't gloat over her parents' misfortune. Instead, she moved with calm confidence, knowing she had taken control of the narrative of her life. Her parents had underestimated her intelligence, her patience, and her resolve. They had tried to exploit her success for their own gain, and it had backfired spectacularly. The final encounter at her firm's conference room had sealed the lesson. Hollis and Mary Beth had witnessed firsthand that their actions had consequences, that manipulation and greed cannot outrun truth and foresight. Kirsten walked away from them, not with hatred, but with clarity. She had been betrayed, but she had also turned that betrayal into power. She had orchestrated the downfall of those who sought to control her. And in doing so, she had ensured her own independence, her dignity, and her triumph. In the end, the greatest revenge was not destruction. It was allowing the guilty to fall by their own choices, proving that karma is patient, precise, and unavoidable.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.